Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana Amay and
Jackie Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing for the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
we talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday.
So on today's episode, we're really excited about our special guest. So welcome, Ali.
Hello.
Hi.
Very excited to be here.
Yes, thank you so much for making the time to talk to us. We're excited to discuss your artistic journey, your experiences, and exploring hyper-feminine art, as well as recording a bonus segment on balancing public art, teaching, and community for our podcast supporters at levelupartist.com.
Absolutely. But before we dive in, we want to share a little bit more about your background with our listeners who may not yet be familiar with your work. She's a multidisciplinary artist based in Iowa City. She is currently a lecturer in painting and drawing at the University of Iowa. She earned her MFA about the University of Iowa in painting and drawing and BFA in painting from the University of Alabama. Her work sits at the crux of ceramics, installation, fabric, and painting. Her work has garnered recognition and support throughout various grants and residencies, has been featured in several publications, including The New Yorker, and has been exhibited across the country, including New York and Los Angeles. Ali's art challenges traditional expectations of femininity by embracing and highlighting femme aesthetics and female sexuality. Her sculptures evoke pieces of oversized jewelry, shoes, and other fashion and domestic items while making bold statements about gender politics. The sculptures incorporate ceramic components, fabric, rhinestones, and even beauty supply items. In addition to her studio work, Ali has completed over 40 public murals across the United States, engaging communities in the painting and design process. Her work celebrates humor, awkwardness, theatricality. Okay, I butchered that one.
Oh crap, now I can't say it. Theatricality.
There it is. Thank you. It happens, people. It happens. Of form femininity, speaking powerfully through its hyper feminine and lovingly excessive style. So that was all a mouthful, y'all. And of course, that is the formal introduction for our listeners. But Ali, especially for those folks that may be with their hands dirty in the studio while they're working or driving as they listen to this, how would you describe your work to someone who has never seen it before?
Yeah, so if I was having to describe it to you, I would say that these are oversized pieces of jewelry, or there's something that is jewelry adjacent. So I use a lot of chains in my work. I use images of like charm bracelets or earrings or nipple tassels or high-heeled shoes. And I really play with the scale a lot in those. And the materials that I use to decorate them are usually beauty supply materials or like really shimmery fabrics. Like they're things that are really going to catch your eye and shine under a really bright light. So I use a lot of rhinestones to sort of cover ceramic surfaces. I use a lot of really shiny fabrics to sort of wrap around chains. And then I create these things that resemble jewelry. Most commonly, I've been doing these really large scale charm bracelets lately. So just making charms, they're interesting. They're sort of like miniatures, but they're also really large when I'm thinking about them. So I'll have like a tiny little bed and there'll be a little dildo on it and it'll be the size of like a Polly Pocket dildo. Or you'll have a little paint palette and all the little palettes of paint on there painted with nail polish. So I'm thinking about using like beauty supplies materials to sort of create these different objects. So they all are very, very detailed and rendered meticulously.
Yeah, and definitely off the scale and lots of
Yeah,
pink, which we will dive into the pink in a
and
second.
extremely fragile.
That too.
Yeah, and I love that play on both just like what's being depicted, but also how scale and the material themselves all are nicely woven together in that concept. But I'm really curious, kind of going back to kind of origins of a creative journey. Have you always been interested in both painting and sculpture as mediums that you explore?
So I was actually less interested in sculpture and more interested in painting. I think I was always like a drawer at heart. I feel like people don't like to use the term drawer, because you think of like a chest of drawers, but I don't know what else to call me. Some kind of drawing artist. I was always a drawing artist at heart, or a painter. In my undergrad, I actually did painting, but then I finally took a class that really challenged the boundaries of that. And I'm sure a lot of other people have taken a similar class, but it's like a concepts in drawing. And so you're starting to think about, what is drawing beyond just making marks on a paper? Like, how else can I make a mark in the world? And so I started exploring making marks on fabric and sewing, and thinking about what is scrunching and stitching, and how is that mark making really similar to making a mark on a canvas. And I got really invested in that material and how it was being built up. And so my forms actually started to get a little more sculptural there. And then when I finally got into grad school, I started bringing in ceramics a little bit more. So I brought in this really hard material to work with this really soft material. So I have things that are stuffed and soft in my artworks, but I also have these things that are very delicate and hard and brittle. And so there's this really nice balance between the two. The objects that I make are very fragile, but even growing up, I was drawing a lot. I would draw with chalk on the sidewalks and just like cover our cul-de-sac that we lived in drawings. And I remember my neighbors would just like come out and be like, what is that girl doing out here? Just drawing mermaids and parking lots and all sorts of interesting things. So I really am based and rooted in drawing, and that's what I got my degree in, but that sort of expanded to include these more sculptural elements. And now I just make sculptures and think about those existing on like a painted wall, and maybe there are other elements on that wall as well.
Whew, absolutely love that. I think the three of us are on team painters that also do sculpture. So
Yeah.
we definitely resonate with that idea of like going past the 2D surface and then
Mhm.
experimenting what happens when we take our flat paper ideas, flat canvas ideas, and try to, make them in the real, in the round in a way.
Yeah, something
Now,
about the 2D doesn't always feel like enough. And I think that's why
yeah.
I sort of moved from that surface.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's like doing shadows to make something pop off the canvas can only take you so far. I mean,
Yeah.
some people do amazing stuff that literally looks like it's popping off the canvas with the
Mhm.
way they do perspective and shadows and things, but sometimes you just need to grab the thing, not off the wall, off a surface, and I don't know, hold it in your hands differently that you would a canvas. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, we're here for it. We're here for it. Now I'm curious. So, doing the research, right? You were born in California, you grew up in Alabama, you're currently in Iowa, and perhaps other places as well. What kind of impact did these different locations and move have on your creative endeavors?
So I'll be real with you. I don't remember anything about California because I was born there. I think we were there until I was 1.5 years old. And then, like, my dad's job took us all around the country. We were in Michigan, we were in Tennessee, we were in Florida, and we finally ended up in Alabama when I was in kindergarten. So I was in Alabama and then transitioned to Iowa. And those are really the two places that I've lived. So growing up, I did live in Alabama. I was there from kindergarten until undergrad, a year after undergrad. And then I took the big move to grad school and went to the University of Iowa, where I got my grad degree and am now teaching. But that was actually a really big change for me. I grew up pretty sheltered. I don't think it's because my parents wanted me to be sheltered. I think it was because I was sort of self-sheltering. If anything, they were like, you can go out into the world and do your thing. But for some reason, that's just how I was. But I just remember the shift moving from Alabama to Iowa being a really big mental shift for me. So there's a certain expectation of how you are supposed to be as a woman in Alabama. There's a certain way that you're supposed to dress. You're not supposed to have sex before you're married. You're not supposed to dress a certain way. You got to like make sure you're wearing all your pretty dresses and your frills, and you got your permed hair, and you're making your appearance be a certain way.
Yeah.
And I remember moving to Iowa and just being like, wow, you don't have to do that here. It's great. And I think I was always really self-expressive anyway. Like I was a fashion blogger and I was really into like figuring out really fun outfits to wear. I was photographing them. My mom was helping me photograph these outfits. I had like a community built into Blogspot back when that was a thing. And I was exploring fashion that way. And I think that actually works a lot into the work that I'm making now, just thinking about different materials and combinations of materials and sort of like almost dressing your pieces up like they're an outfit. But I really explored like what is femininity to me. I wasn't thinking of femininity as the South was defining it. And for me, like femininity is just being comfortable in that and wearing what I want to wear. And for me, I love just wearing pink, getting my nails done. But I also have, days when that outfit wants to change. You want something a little bit grungier, a little bit moodier, and you can still be feminine in that way. So, how can you present yourself differently than what that typical Southern expectation of femininity was? And that's something that really became apparent when I did move to Iowa and just like realized moving from this place that had a very certain mental space to a very vastly different mental space. So I'm moving from a state that is mostly red to a state that was a little more blue at the time. And so just like seeing how people were allowed to express themselves in a different way.
That makes
Yeah.
sense. From Southern Belle to Northern Rebel.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm imagine that was probably such a big like release when you moved there that maybe you didn't even know that you felt restricted by. I think a lot of the time, I mean, with any big perspective of the world shift, like you don't realize what kind of um I don't know, like filters that you have on your view of the world or blinders, I guess is a better word of, oh, wait, this didn't feel right to me and I wasn't quite sure why. But now that I have an example as to an alternative, now like I'm really connecting with it. And so it makes sense for like a physical change like that, how that would happen. And I'm curious too with art residencies, do you feel like you had a similar like epiphanies or blinders that came off during art residencies that shifted your creative practice specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was recently a resident at South Dakota State University, and I'm actually going to be visiting there again at the end of the month to paint a mural, which is really exciting. But it's residencies are really interesting because you go there with pretty much nothing. You don't have anything from your current studio. You don't have like the context of all the things that you're working on. And I think that's the thing that's so great about it. When I was in South Dakota, I had a month to just start fresh, start new, and just explore some new ideas. So I had a lot of ideas, and I think a lot of them changed really drastically. It was a time when I became a lot more brave with my color palette. I took it as, I'm going to be a little riskier with this show. I'm going to not make these super subdued color palettes. I'm going to get a little more intense with the imagery. And that's when I actually started using literal objects in the pieces that I was making. So making these charm bracelets where you could actually look at each of these individual charms and identify what each of those are. Before I was making work that was a little more abstract. So you could tell that something was maybe a shoe, but it was sort of blobby. Maybe it was merging from one form to another form. But at this residency, I really solidified and said, I don't need to beat around the bush anymore. I just need to be a little bit more direct. And I think that's coming from like being a little more confident. Maybe it's being a little farther away from Alabama than I was before. Who knows? And it's just like being more confident in that work and saying, yes, I'm going to make something that has an object in it. I think sometimes it can be scary to like make depictions of objects because you're always afraid of how people are going to read them. Um, Obviously, a lot of the objects that I use are very political, like an IUD is super political. Using images like vibrators is going to be seen as obviously very sexual. And it's like, why are we seeing these as these things that are very charged? That interests me. But also just people interpreting an object in a certain way. You could have an object as like a chain. What is that being read as? Some people might read that as entrapment. Some people might read it as just a connection to something. And so, I can't be fearful about what everybody's going to read into something, but I can help inform what my opinion about that is going to be.
I love it. And by sharing your narrative of the work, that's literally what you're doing. You're basically putting your making the line in the sand and going, there's what you all want to think about it, and there's what I actually intended, for the audience to do. But as I don't know who said this, I've heard it a couple different ways. It's almost like your viewer is the one that finishes the work. So it's like that interesting there's your intention and then how it gets read by others. So I love that idea. Now, I believe some news or some congratulations are in order of something something I saw on Instagram recently. Grant Fellowship, I believe,
Yeah, so
right?
I was
Council?
recently awarded the Iowa Artist Fellowship, and 5 people across the state of Iowa are given this award. It includes $10,000 in funding, which is really awesome. I can get a lot of rhinestones with that. And it also comes with like professional development and mentoring. So it's something that I've been applying for I think the last 3 years. So it really meant a lot to finally get that. And I'm really excited to start this journey. So it's a year-long
No,
thing.
that's amazing. And obviously, from what I've seen, it's not the first one. So can you share with us a little bit about the kind of impact that having these kind of grants or fellowships have had in your career?
Yeah, so I think they give you a lot of freedom. I mean, if you didn't have money before and you have money now, you have the ability to do a lot of things you couldn't before. And one of those things for me is just like increasing the scale and being able to have extra materials. I think normally I'm very conservative with the materials I use. I don't want to have a lot of waste in the studio. I want to try to hold on to everything that I have. I don't want excess. I don't want to be throwing things away. And so having a grant like this means that I can be purchasing more materials to be choosing from. Of course, I want to use all of those. I'm not saying I'm going to throw any of those extra materials away, but it just gives you a wider range of things to pick from, and also materials that are going to be higher quality and last a lot longer. So instead of buying 1 yard of something, some fabric, I can buy 5 yards of it and have a stock of it in my studio. So if I want to come back to it in a couple of years, I've got it. I don't have to worry about that fabric necessarily running out. That's something that I've had to worry about in the past. I think grants are awesome too because it allows you to take workshops, and those are things that you normally don't have funding for. A lot of workshops are going to cost money. Traveling there, paying for the workshop, finding lodging and food at the workshop, like something like that can end up running you around $2,500, $3,000. And that's just not reasonable. That's, twice what your rent might be. And then you're going to have to pay rent when you're there anyway. So having that extra funding really helps you to do that. And in a lot of ways, it feels like school again. You have this time, you have this space to be making whatever it is that you want to be and really just explore.
Oh, I love that. And yes, resources for artists are like a big conversation that we have on the podcast, but also in person in our studios. We're just like, we just want a big empty room and a little bit of funding so we can bulk buy these materials.
Yep.
And that's where magic can happen. So I'm super excited to see the work that you're going to be making during that residency. I'm sure it'll be amazing. And we touched on it a little bit before, but I kind of want to go back to that, like with this opportunity, maybe specifically, and work that you see in the future. How do you feel like your work really challenges those expectations of femininity?
Yeah,
And
so I think typically we think of femininity as something that's weak, unfortunately. We think of a feminine object as something that's soft and delicate and can't resist against anything. And I'm really trying to turn that around and say that no, pink is very powerful. Pink can actually say something. Just because something is decorative does not mean that it's frivolous and meaningless. Like there can still be something behind that. And we look back and we think of like the Palace of Versailles and how frivolous and decorative that was. It was incredibly powerful, right? Like people were walking through those halls and they were impressed by the architecture. It was showing you the meaning of what it meant to be to walk through those halls. And so there is no pink is just not something that isn't powerful anymore. And I want to prove that with the work that I'm making. So when people are first looking at my work, they might think, oh, look at this cute little sparkly charm bracelet. Oh, it's so adorable. And then they start looking a little closer and they realize, like, oh, there's other objects on here. Like maybe there's something a little more sinister to it. Maybe there's something a little bit more sexual to it. So it's not just what that first impression is going to be. They need to get a little closer to it. They need to read into it a bit more. They need to understand it. They need to sort of have a conversation with it and realize that there's something more beyond that really frilly exterior. So at first you come up to it, it's sparkly, it's glittery, but then after you're looking at it for enough time, you realize there's actually something more beyond that exterior. Maybe it's like the Legally Blonde theory. I think that could be a safe name for it. So you can still be frilly and feminine and still know what you're talking about. Your appearance doesn't define who you are.
I love that so much. Plus, it's like, I mean, I'll let you all do your Google researches, rabbit hole, so to speak, but I've heard this before in other art podcasts and art history podcasts that pink used to be for men and blue
Yep.
was for women for
Yep.
the longest time, or in some countries, it doesn't matter. Like,
Mm-hmm.
literally, to countries in Asia with men wearing pink Hello Kitty shirts. And do they care? No, they don't. It has nothing to do with, is it weak? Is it masculine? It doesn't. It's more like it's just another color. Do you like it? Yay or nay? Like
Yeah.
why do we have to take it further? There's even anyways, historical records of armies wearing like dark pink, like for their uniforms.
Yeah,
I'll let
because it
you all dive
resembled
into that
blood.
more.
Like dark
Yeah,
pink was
yeah,
the closest to red, which is like the closest to blood.
yeah,
So
and it was so
blood
expensive
is
too.
powerful, blood is strong. And it's like, well, we got a lot of it because we're women. So
At least once a month. Hello. Uh, speaking of, but no, it's one of those like I like that you're challenging some of that and also going like, yeah, so what? Like, take it as you will. I like this color and so I love that. Now, when did you first start? I think you touched on this a little bit, but I do want to dive in a little more. That time when you start combining ceramics with textiles and then starting to add rhinestone and pom-poms, I think you alluded to it being during was it more during a residency or was it more during grad school? And was there something that like kind of launched you in that direction and you're like, oh my God, I need like to, like, rhinestone, like just bejewel this item I made in ceramics. Like, tell us a little bit more about how that happened.
yeah, so it was happening in grad school. I think it was actually my last year of grad school. So it's a 3-year program that I was in. And my last year, I had gotten into like ceramics, second year, third year. But that third year, I was really like honing in. I was making these objects that they felt really sexual and ionic, but I didn't really know what they were for. Like they kind of looked like objects of pleasure, but they were really weird and they had like these nubs coming off of them. And it was just missing something. I had like these ropes and they were a little too bondagey and I wanted them to just feel more like something I wanted to make. And I'm like, okay, I'm getting bored of making these. Like something is not working with this object. What am I supposed to do? And it's like, oh, why don't I just treat it like an outfit? Why don't I just treat it like something that I would want to wear? And I started thinking about everything that I'm making as an outfit that I would want to wear because I've heard that if you make work that you actually like, you're going to keep making it. And that's very true. So you want to actually be making work that you really like and you like looking at and you enjoy making the process of. And so I found some rhinestones and I started bedazzling these and I just enjoyed the way that it looked and the meanings of like these rhinestones. So rhinestones for me were this really interesting object because we had them as little girls on everything that we owned. So like our little
Hmm.
Disney princess heels, you would bedazzle your nails, you would have like a little shirt with rhinestones and a butterfly all over it from Limited Too. And then like as we got older, those rhinestones started to change context versus depending on the body that they were on. So you'd see them on like fishnet tights and like booty shorts and like rhinestone bras at Victoria's Secret. And so suddenly it became something that was a little bit more sexual. So it's a material that can be really playful, but also be really sexual depending on the object that it's on. And so I was interested in how it could change that. Like if I just have a regular IUD versus a bedazzled IUD, like what is the difference between those two things? How is that changing the way that we're reading those?
Love that. Yeah, I have nothing else. I got nothing else. That was perfect. I love
Yeah,
it.
which I guess kind of ties into there are some pieces of yours also that are sculptures that directly resemble that oversized jewelry and fashion items, which I think is also a fun play on not just obviously the relation of the material itself being bedazzled and very bright and eye-catching, but also shifting scale too, right? Like heightening the emphasis on them.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I
I mean, I think of these objects too as like things that you could possibly wear. So I used to be into performance art when I was in
Mhm.
undergrad, and I just realized it wasn't for me. I really liked the idea of making costumes and making clothing, but I was not good at getting into like the performance mindset. And so I thought about how can I make my work feel performative without actually having a performance be happening. And so like I did this by, making these objects feel really glittery and like you go up to them and you're sort of starstruck by those materials and they're pulling you in from afar. So they're almost like they're little performers on the walls.
Oh, I love that so much. Now, something we touched on a little bit earlier is that one of the things that you do is murals. And as the three of us know, and many of our listeners do, murals, it really depends on the client, right? And how much freedom you're given. Sometimes it's literally like, I mean, there's, especially if there's like a government entity or nonprofit, sometimes there's very specific imagery that they want. But then there's those beautiful clients that all of us love that go, do whatever you like. So those are the ones I'm specifically referring to, mural wise. On those where you're giving a little bit more free reign, how do you integrate themes of femininity and empowerment into those murals where you have a little bit more freedom?
Yeah. I would say I don't have a lot of those, unfortunately. That
Yes,
I
yes.
have more of them. And what I usually do with a lot of my community projects is I try to start with a design that is as much of me as I can possibly put in there. And then throughout the design process, the back and forth, a lot of that will get taken away. A lot of that will sort of rub off. And I might be left with like one or two little things that I'm really excited about. So it might be a ribbon that's sort of like wrapping through there that feels in line with like imagery I would use in my studio. It might be like a really bright color palette that would feel in line with something that I would paint behind one of the objects that I make. And so even though I'm not always making exactly what I want, because there are those community views that are incorporated in there, I try to make sure that every design I have at least has a few things that feel relevant to my studio. I would like to get to a place where, most of the mural that I am making is 80% what I want and 20% what they want. I think right now it's more like 30% what I want, 70% what I want, but that's a lot more than it was when I
Yes.
first started this mural gig 7 years ago. So I feel like as long as I'm sort of going uphill generally, general uphill trend, we're doing good.
Yeah, and I love like when we met during an exhibition in Virginia that behind your sculptures you had actually painted a mural and it definitely was in complete sync, and
Yep.
related to the artwork that you're doing. So I guess to give some folks hope, maybe sometimes depending on your exhibition space, that might
Yep.
be the compromise, maybe they don't want it on the big side of their building, but maybe if you're exhibiting the work, there's an opportunity to maybe paint on some panels, that can
Yeah.
come down after an exhibition, but that could go in line with the rest of the work and kind of express it that way. I love that. I love that. Well, next up, we love Ali to ask all our guests about how they define success. Are we ready for that one? But first, we're going to put a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by our Level Up Artist courses.
We understand that life as a modern artist can be both exciting and overwhelming. Plus, there's a lot of information out there. So, what do visual artists actually need?
We've spent countless hours of trial and error, weeding through tons of information to find the gold, so you don't have to waste your time going down those endless rabbit holes.
In addition to weekly calls, we have created video course modules to cover everything from artist documents to exhibition prep, social media to technology, sales strategies, artist mindset, PDF resources, templates, and so much more.
Ready to get started? Head on over to levelupartists.com to learn more, get immediate access, and level up your career today.
Welcome back, everybody. So we're gonna go ahead and dive right in. Ali, how do you define success as an artist?
I would define success as doing pretty much what I want when I want. Just having the freedom and the resources to be doing what you want. I am not somebody who would function well in an 8 to 5 setting, sitting in a cubicle looking at a computer. I would like to set the boundaries for when I'm doing certain kinds of work. And obviously, this is never going to be ideal for anybody. We all have those things that we have to do, whether it's housework or housekeeping with our art, whether that's photographing the art or applying to things we maybe don't feel super into writing 5 pages about, but at least being able to determine when those things are going to happen is really nice for me. So I feel like my success in that regard has gone up slowly in the years. I have a schedule that I'm really happy with. I teach twice a week and have the rest of the time to pretty much do whatever I want, whether that's painting murals or spending time in my studio. And that just makes me all the much happier.
Oh, love that.
Definitely could not agree more. More time creating work, putting it out in the world.
Woo.
That's the way to spend time. Now, what is one piece of advice you wish you had heard before you got started on your creative journey?
I've heard it a lot before, but rejections happen and they're always going to happen. Doesn't matter how many like great applications you've put out. Sometimes the right people are just not seeing them. I think like this Iowa Arts Council fellowship that I just got is a great example of that. I've put out application over and over and over again. And sometimes you might think it's a really great application, and it might be, but it also might just be that different people are looking at it each time, or maybe they want you to apply to it a few times. And so you just have to keep applying to something over and over and over again. And sometimes you don't get it the first time. Sometimes you just have to keep putting in the effort and sort of refining what you're making and being more specific. I think being specific is the most important thing when you're applying to anything. And don't take the rejections personal. It's really easy to take all those rejections personal. I know somebody who actually like collects all of his rejections and puts them in a folder and is like, I'm going to try to collect, 500 rejections. And I don't think he's gotten there yet, which is really awesome. Like he's just been applying to so many things and hasn't gotten to
Mhm.
that point yet. So, see those rejections as this is me and I tried and I'm going to try again. And at some point I'll eventually get it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely agree with that tracking of both the ones that you get, which is always very exciting and we're celebrating, whether it's a mural opportunity or a grant or a group exhibition or a solo, but also keeping track of the number that you don't get. Because, yeah, I have kind of that similar strategy of shoot for 100 rejections in like 1 year. That
Yeah.
means you're probably applying to a lot of freaking things. And even if you get 100 rejections, probably about 15, 20, 30 of those are going to be yeses,
Yeah.
which is kind of a fun mind game to play with yourself.
Definitely a numbers game. Plus, it stings more if you only applied to one thing that month and that one came back as a no. So
Yeah.
volume, people, volume. It stings a little less if you have more things in the works for sure. Now, Allie, if somebody randomly hands you $100, what would you splurge on or invest in? It has to be something that brings you joy and relates to your art or business.
Y'all are gonna think I'm goofy, but I would spend it on $100 worth of sour gummy octopus from the gas station because those keep me going when I'm painting murals. They keep me going when I'm in my studio. I'm like a little kid and I just need to eat sugar constantly when I'm working. I don't know what it is. Like I don't care about coffee. I don't really care about caffeine that much. I might have a little tea here and there, but give me a sour gummy octopus. Just give me like I mean, that would be so many. If I got $100 worth of sour gummy octopus, that would be at least a year's supply.
Ugh.
At least for me.
Especially if you go to like a big box store somewhere where you can like buy in bulk. Oh man, they can hook
Yes.
you up.
Hmm.
I know. I'm like, any of your students, if they're listening to this, you know what to do to get that grade up. Get those gummies.
Sour gummy
Get
octopus.
sour gummy. That's so
Sharks.
specific. I love it. I love it. Well, and we're here for it. And no, it's not silly. We love it when people say food. We need it. Sustenance, baby. Sustenance. Now, Allie, what exciting projects do you have coming up that you'd like our listeners to know about?
Well, you all
besides
already
the
heard
amazing
about the
things?
Iowa Artist Fellowship, which I'm very
Yep.
excited about. With that, I'm actually going to start making some performative work. So I talked earlier about how I wasn't doing performative work anymore, but the thing is, I just didn't want to be the performer. I want to see other people in costumes that I'm making, and I want to just sort of be the director of them. And so I have 2 shows that are coming up in Cedar Rapids. And in there, I want to be making objects that are actually based off home decor. So instead of thinking of jewelry, they're going to be sort of jewelry fused with objects of home decor. So maybe there's like a shower head and there's sort of charms dripping from the shower head. I think I've got like some things in my studio here I could actually show. Or whatever, a squeegee, and maybe there's little things dripping from that squeegee. And then I want to make these performers interact with them somehow, just to sort of up the ante of what that meaning is going to be behind the object. So I'm not really entirely sure how that's going to look yet. I think that's going to unfold over the course of the year. We'll see how many garments I actually get made, but I'm hoping I can get at least 2 or 3 really elaborate ones done.
Oh, absolutely. And please, please, please have some of that video
Oh,
on the
I will.
socials. We can't wait to see it.
That's the plan. I want to learn how to actually take videos. I feel like I'm good at the photos, but I
Or
don't know how
delegate it.
to take videos
Don't be
right now.
afraid to
So
delegate with another artist.
Well, for our listeners who want to stay in contact with you and see pictures and videos of those upcoming performances, where can they stay connected with you after they listen to today's episode?
yeah, so my Instagram is just Ali Hval, ALIHVAL, and my website is alihval.com. Pretty simple. And I've got all my murals and all my work there. You can also sign up for a newsletter. I try to send it out every quarter, but I think I failed the last quarter, so we're going to try to get on top of that again.
It's not a fail. It was an attempt that did not come to fruition, and that is okay. You are busy. You have a lot of stuff.
Guilty as
Oh,
charged.
absolutely. Hey, we've all done it. Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to link that in the show notes. And would you mind staying with us a few extra minutes so we can discuss how you balance public art, teaching, and community on a bonus segment for podcast supporters?
I'll be here.
Yay! Awesome. Well, in the meantime, for our listeners, if you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at May Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we are at Level Up Artist on Instagram. You can also visit levelupartist.com to hear the rest of our conversation and become a podcast supporter.
This will give you access to amazing off-the-record conversations with our guests, the community platform, and it helps to keep the podcast going.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.